I think the thing that's amazing about creativity is people think there's all this magic to what becomes a hit. And especially when you think about things like consumer products, we think, wow, there's some people who have this like tastemaker status.
Right.
But the reality is we have all this science about what drives people to like things and dislike other things. There's actually a lot of like reason and systemization to this magical thing.
When you say reason, give me some of it, because everybody feels like creativity is this kind of ephemeral idea.
So let me give you one example. So we think what becomes a hit is this sort of magical thing. The reality is scientists have been studying this stuff for years, and really what becomes a hit is based around sort of two big things. We have this urge as humans where we actually crave things that are familiar. We like things that are safe enough to feel comfortable, but we also crave things that are novel and new and interesting and sort of display potential sources of reward. So the ideas that tend to become hits are these ideas which are a blend of the familiar and the novel. We don't actually like things that are radically new.
Okay, give us something completely practical. So if you're sitting there watching this morning, tell me something that somebody in the book said that you think was sort of the highlight for you.
So one of the things I think is really interesting is that these great creatives, one of the things they do is that they're actually huge consumers of culture. So we think oftentimes around creators as these big doers. They're constantly doing stuff. But actually, these people who are really great at creating hits, whether it's a hit song, a hit piece of fashion, a hit consumer product, they tend to spend a lot of time consuming things, because what allows them to learn what is the right level of familiarity.
But if you talk about something like Netflix, which is clearly pretty radical when it started within the industry, I'd say that does involve creative genius behind it. I mean, it sounds like you're being critical of people that have had unbelievable ideas.
So basically what you find is that the ideas that tend to be most successful are actually quite iterative. So look at Steve Jobs, for example. Right? He has this famous quote about not listening to customers, but the reality is when he did that, think about the Apple Newton in the 90s, it was a failure, right? It was this big leapfrog innovation, but it was too new. The ideas that have been really successful for Apple are these blend of the familiar and the novel, right? The iPod was a better MP3 player. The iPhone was an iPod with a phone. The iPad was an iPhone without a phone. So you find that the products that actually become successful on a commercial level are actually the products that are much more iterative, right? The Segway is now basically used by mall cops. It was too much of leapfrog innovation.
Well, but that's the question, though. But do you look at the Segway and say that's a failure?
I think so. I think when you look at creativity, it's actually very intertwined with social recognition. It's very hard for us to say that something was creative if it didn't end up being successful.
Where would you put Elon Musk? Because there's this huge debate. New York Post, one of their journalists called him a fraud. Other people say, wait a second. He's created all of these companies, been successful at it. Where would you put him?
I would definitely say that he is a creative genius, but I think he's also a great example of someone who fits a lot of the sort of patterns around creativity. Like, he's someone who works with a lot of other people. Like, we have this idea of him as Tony Stark, but the reality is this is a guy who was always rich. When he started SpaceX, he hired all these famous, rocket scientists to help him and get it off the ground. He wasn't doing this by himself in a bunker somewhere. And so I think we have this notion of this lone genius creator, but Elon Musk is not that, right? He has really great executives.
But I'll give him credit. He's rich because of PayPal.
Yes, that's what I meant. I meant when he started PayPal.
Do you have a view on,
when he started SpaceX.
Do you have a view on age and creativity and entrepreneurship, which is to say that arguably some of the most shoot-the-moon successes in terms of entrepreneurs all did it, I hate to say this, in their 20s rather, before they ever hit 30.
Yeah. So there was a study that just came out last week that said the most successful age for public listed startup companies that end up going public is 47.
47?
47.
There's still hope for 47. All of us.
So I do think that when you look at it, we have this sort of an American culture, this sort of archetype of the creative as this young genius type.
So hold on, the founder's 47?
Yes.
I love hearing this.
What about the corporate structure, though? Do you see more successful innovation in 100% owned entrepreneurial companies versus the big listed corporate giants?
Yeah, so there is some really interesting studies that founder CEOs tend to outperform hired gun CEOs, especially in technology companies. I think that's because there is a critical role in sort of moral credibility and vision. So what the book sort of argues is it's not discounting the idea that there is this sort of magical genius thing. It's just saying it's not actually that magical. It feels magical, but the reality is this thing which seems sort of special is really the result of a huge amount of preparation, of skill, and ultimately pattern recognition.
If these success stories that you've analyzed aren't down to creative geniuses. Can you predict what the next one is likely to be based on people's tastes and all the factors you're saying?
Yeah, so I think when you see that there's some people who are able to hit after hit, industry after industry, create these products that seem culture changing, what I found from my interviews, about half of them are sort of aware of what they're doing, right? And the other half sort of have subconsciously intuited to where they are. But there are people out there who have this amazing knack for saying where culture is going. And when you talk to them about that, they'll tell you that they don't think it's actually that special. One of the things that was so interesting is when you interview super successful creative achievers, they don't think it's that special.
And
when you interview people in the middle,
they don't lose it. They can do it for years and years and years, and decades. Maybe.
One of the things that was interesting, so I interviewed David Rubenstein, and one of the things I thought was so interesting about him is that he's such a curious person. Like, he literally now has an interview show, right? But one of the things you find is that the best teams are a combination of people from the establishment and people who have more fresh and novel ideas. And I think David's a great example of this. He's constantly bringing younger people into his orbit, constantly learning.
But do we believe it's repeat? Everyone thinks they have one good idea in them, right? Do you think that people actually have many good ideas in them?
I think that people are able to develop many good ideas. I think ultimately when you look at all the science, I talk a lot about this in the book, when you look at all the science around creativity, we've been studying for years, and what we know is that creativity is a learnable, nurturable skill. It's just something that we talk about as if it's a fixed asset.
Okay. The book is called The Creative Curve. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey there, thanks for checking out CNBC on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all of the day's biggest stories. You can also click on any of the videos around me to watch the latest from CNBC. Thanks for watching.